Awesome, good. I really want to thank everyone for being here today. And I don't just mean that in this is a conference talk, and so that is what I am supposed to say sort of way. I genuinely mean that. The work that I'm going to be talking about today is probably some of the most proud work of my career so far. And so I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to share that story with you all. I'm also hopeful that by sharing this story, I will be equipping you all with some tools so that if you ever find yourself in the middle of a story like the one that I'm about to tell, you can take some lessons learned from how we dealt with it and feel even more prepared to deal with it than we were, because these are, while few and far between, very complex issues to navigate. And so we can all have a good little chuckle here, right? I know that this was not the context that Ronald Reagan was foreseeing when he said the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." However, this is where our story begins. You see, back in early 2023, I was sitting at home in Tennessee in front of my computer, and my boss forwarded me a meeting invite. The meeting invite was essentially brackets external, US government, subject that made it very clear that this was not a social call. And so I messaged him, my boss, Tony Baker, and I said, "Hey, Tony, what is this?" He said, "We don't know. They're going to tell us on the call." And so after 3 to 4 hours of crippling anxiety, we finally hopped on that call with the US government. And what we found out was that they had observed an APT developing a pretty nasty exploit against some of our pretty popular offers. If any of you are customers or consultants who work with joint customers, you will know that our communications modules are prolific across Rockwell deployments. And so the fact that we were seeing an exploit being developed against these products was very concerning. I will say that while this was a sobering call, this was also sort of a relief. If any of you are OEMs in the audience, like Megan Samford, they will tell you that none of us go to bed at night without the knowledge that when we're closing our eyes to go to sleep, there are folks in other countries who are sitting at their desks trying to figure out how to use our products to affect customers, to affect critical infrastructure. And so while these calls from the US government were sobering and a little scary, to say the least, that kind of early warning that we are able to get from phone calls like this is invaluable. And so now that I've whet all of your appetite with the US government and APTs and ICS potential exploit malware, I'm sure there are some of you in the audience who are sitting there going, "Oh, I can't wait till she gets to the part about attribution, about IOCs, about how this was discovered." And if we could close the doors before I let them know that that's not coming, that would be great. Unfortunately, the price that we pay for getting this type of early warning is that in some scenarios like this, our answers have to be, "I can't say," or "I genuinely don't know" to these questions. I actually did close the doors. That's hilarious. And so please just know that while we are not able to share these specific details in this venue, and none of our partners who participated will be able to either, that the point of this talk isn't in any way diminished by the fact that we can't share these things. So timeline of what the public saw. So if you were a customer, or if you were another vendor, or if you were other places in the US government, you saw that in hindsight, in early 2023, we got a notice that we worked with government partners to analyze this exploit, and then you got a notice in your inbox from my team saying, "Hey, this is a thing, please go patch," and also that we have some mitigation rules for you. The vulnerabilities themselves were essentially malicious SIP packet messages that could affect a pretty nasty RCE exploit against our EN2 and EN3 comms modules, a slightly less nasty but very similar denial of service attack against the EN4s. And so between this and this, you're probably sitting there going, "Oh, I already knew this. Why are you on stage? Why did Dale approve your CFP?" Right? And so what you didn't see is this. This was what it actually looked like behind the scenes. And so I've been told that my laser pointer doesn't work. But somewhere around that second step, where we were developing the fix, working on the rules, we realized that Rockwell and the US government working on this wasn't going to be enough. And we realized that Rockwell and the US government and just folks that we were partnered with, like Dragos and Clarity, weren't going to be enough. We needed more coverage. Because what we were really worried about was at this time when this was happening, neither party had any good indication about if this had been used already, if it hadn't, what it was going to target, and what the timeline looked like as far as if it hadn't been used, when were they looking to use it. And so there was this real fear that we were going to get to disclosure day and we were going to publish a notification and the threat actors were going to look at their watches and go, it's going to take Mandiant 72 hours to write rules for this. It's going to take, 4 weeks on a good day for us to patch this. And so we've got time to actually go use this before we lose it. And so what then kicked off was this collaboration proposal, which is the so what of this talk, where we started figuring out how we were going to work across industry with all of the leading security vendors to get protections into customer environments and to get some help on the fix and rule development. And so this was a big risk. For any of you who know your detection vendors, there is a business incentive to be the first out of the gate with a report, to name it first, to have the hottest take, to disagree with each other over if this APT is really the same as this unnamed threat group, which is really the same as this other cluster, right? And so we had a real discussion about, can we get everyone in the same room working on this without introducing risk to the customers? And that was a sobering conversation, because if this went wrong, it was going to go really, really wrong. And so we decided to try it, because to Dale's point about belief is powerful, even false belief, we decided that it was going to work because it had to. And so there should also be some other folks on this slide, but I can only fit so many. But we got a core team together, and these phone calls initially were hilarious, I will tell you, because we essentially had the government partners send them an email invite with us blind CC'd on it. And so folks would show up to these calls and unexpectedly, like Marty, would see my shining face that they did not expect. And those calls started with, hey, we want to tell you a thing. We would like some help. We need you to essentially agree to Fight Club rules. And if you cannot agree to those, this call can't proceed any further. While I'm sitting there blinking with please just say yes so you can help me eyeballs. And so luckily, everyone said yes. And everyone agreed not only to work with us and the government, but also to work with each other. And we proceeded to put all of your favorite security vendors, who typically do not work directly with each other, in a common Slack. We gave all of them the same exact information. We gave them the exploit information. We gave them a copy of the detection rules. And we gave them a projected disclosure date. And let me tell you, if you ever want to be humbled about your ability to write good snort rules, put them in a Slack with all of your favorite security vendors and say, can you improve these? Because they will. And so after about 3 weeks of this, we actually had a good set of security rules that we were ready to push. And everyone was harmonized on their disclosures. And so that was what you all saw on the backside. We added some initial vendors at the end, like shout out to CrowdStrike, who's also one of our partners, to do some additional threat reporting on this closer to the back end of it. But this was really the core group that was able to work together to help us with this so that all of our customers could be better protected. What we got out of this, again, if you ever want to be really humbled about your detection rule writing, give them to Talos, Mandiant, Dragos folks and ask them to make them better. We got an amazing amount of feedback on our detection rules, on how to make them as good as they possibly could be. Like I said earlier, we also didn't really know if this was anywhere prior to disclosure. And so if you were a customer of ours, without your knowledge, we had pushed these into your environment about 10 days before we disclosed. And I didn't sleep much those first few nights that we had pushed them into your environments, because we were all sort of collectively holding our breath waiting to see if we got a hit, waiting to see if we'd gotten lucky and caught this in time. And thankfully, what we learned was that it did not appear that this had been used anywhere. We also got some really great false positive characteristics that we actually were able to go back and fix the threat detection rules that we had written. One of the great public examples that we can talk about that I believe Dragos put out is in the first 72 hours-ish of us pushing these rules into customer environments, Dragos saw a hit at a brewery. And so we got a phone call from Dragos saying, hey, we think we have a false positive on this. Can we take a look at it? Because we don't know that an APT would develop all of this capability that they appeared to have developed to target alcoholic beverages. And so we were able to go actually get some false positives and fix it not only in the Dragos environment, but across all of the other security vendors, so that we weren't having a bunch of false hits on disclosure day. Again, because we pushed these into customer environments early, on disclosure day, customers were able to know suddenly that they already had rules in their environment. That if you were a Rockwell and any of these guys' customer, on disclosure day, when you woke up that morning to that in your inbox, we'd already been monitoring your environment for this for weeks. And so to have that kind of proactive defense against an exploit that the customer didn't even know existed was invaluable to us. Thanks to programs like Neighborhood Keeper, we had this places that normally we never would have been able to get visibility even after disclosure day, let alone weeks beforehand. This wasn't all blue sky though, I will say. So what we saw when we set up these Slack channels, there was a central channel where we had Rockwell and everyone, and then there were individual channels, right? That we went, hey, Dragos, Mandiant, we understand that you may need to talk to us specifically about something that you are concerned might be sensitive to your IP, that you don't want to put in a larger channel with the rest of your competitors, because we do still recognize that you all are competitors. And so what we saw, because trust is hard, especially anytime you ask people to collaborate together for the first time, was we would see folks leveraging those individual channels for things that didn't really affect their IP. And then Rockwell would sort of, play school teacher, where we would take that information and then put it back in the common channel and say, hey, Dragos asked this question. This is how we answered it. Just for everyone else's knowledge, do you have any questions so we can all collaborate? And sure enough, each one of them would then message us individually in each of their siloed channels and say, hey, I have a question about that. And so there was very clearly still some suspicion of one another and some desire to have these vendor-only communications. And it took some time for that to work itself out. By the end, it was definitely better than it was. We also waited. And this is something that I'll own. I've worked for one of these detection vendors. There is, as we covered, there is a business incentive to be first. There is a business incentive to publish early. And so we had discussions internally about, how do we time this? How do we bring in detection vendors in a way that is most bang for our buck but lowest risk to not only Rockwell but to all of our customers? Because if we bring in friends and family to work on this with us, and then before we have finalized our fix, someone decides that they are going to publish this TLP Amber, right? Because the information was mostly TLP Red but somewhat TLP Amber, depending on what it was. Or if someone decides to leak it, or, right? And we didn't have a fix, that was going to be really bad. And so We waited. We waited a long time to bring everyone in. We waited until everything we thought was pretty much done. And I will tell you from having that experience that if the me standing on that stage could go back and talk to April 2023 Maggie and tell her, no one's going to leak. They're all going to have it together. They're all going to work together. They're going to respect the NDAs. And they are actually going to put the customer first and work together collaboratively well on this. I would have brought people in months in advance. We would have gotten a lot more done. I think that the organization piece would have been way better. And so, I will tell you standing here on this stage today, while this is a happy story, we definitely didn't do everything perfectly. What surprised us? Because, for better or for worse, at this point in time, the Rockwell report was behind a Rockwell login wall, and all of your security vendors' reports were not. We were prepared on disclosure day to be doing nothing but answer customer questions. I think we got 3. And so that was strange. That was suspicious. I worried genuinely that people hadn't seen it. There was an error with our emails. And so I called Marty and Jeff Rotberg, who was here somewhere. There we are. And I said, are you guys getting questions from customers? And Kate, who's running our stage. And they said, oh, yeah, we're getting customer feedback. We're getting customer questions. A lot of what we're seeing is that our reports have more detail than your disclosure does, and so customers are asking us, which was interesting, but it was good, right? Because they were able to work with our joint customers through these venues, right? So if you're a Tenable and a Rockwell customer, they were able to go to Tenable and say, hey, what do you think about this? And we had enabled Tenable on disclosure day to have a very informed opinion to answer those questions. The thing that shocked me most, we did an after action on this because we'd never done one of these before. We did an after action with everyone involved. And the feedback that we got was that these security vendors didn't just want to work with Rockwell more. They were asking us how they could work with each other more. And that shocked me, I'll be honest. Because of the competitive nature of this field, I was not prepared for Dragos and Mandiant to say, how do we use Rockwell as an avenue to collaborate between each other more? And so while that was surprising, that was probably one of the more encouraging things I think I've heard in the past 3 years, if I'm being totally honest. Because the power of those two companies being willing to collaborate for my customers, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. I will say, though, that this could have gone very wrong. Rockwell took a big risk in letting their product security incident response manager, who had been there less than half a year, ask them to take this risk. I went to my boss initially with this idea and said, hey, I think I want to have everyone work together on this. And he had me draw up a plan. And it was contentious, right? There was a lot of risk involved in this on what if Rockwell decides to do this and it ends up being a disaster and then customers are impacted. That was a real conversation we had, especially since, again, none of this was protected by being in the classified space. This was all generally under Fight Club rules and good faith. Had we disclosed this out of sync, had the vulnerabilities leaked, had people departed in their reports from reality, right? Had people gotten really creative with artistic liberties on their reports to make them more fuddy, right? This could have all spun really, really, really far sideways. And so I will say that this is something that we put a lot of thought into as we were having these conversations initially about what we were what we were going to do moving forward with this plan. Luckily, none of this happened. I can say that standing on this stage as, hey, you all are able to go forward and do this because we sort of did it first, right? I will also take this opportunity, since we are at S4, to say that I don't think this would have worked had everyone been strangers. I think events like this are super important because everyone that we had those initial phone calls with, right? Marty, Jeff, some folks from Mandiant that were also on those calls. Not only did they all know me, my boss, the folks on my team, they also all knew each other. And so it was a very different conversation of, hey, Marty, can you work with Paul, right? Versus, hey, two strangers from very competing companies, are you able to and willing to work with each other? And so I think events like this are super important because having those relationships in place so that everyone sort of recognized each other to some degree when you put them in a common channel. There was already a huge buffer of built-in trust that I wouldn't have been able to manufacture in this scenario otherwise synthetically, right? And so there is a call to action piece on this that I really want to encourage everyone to try to duplicate this. We were able to exponentially increase our customers' defense posture by leveraging that trust and getting everyone in a room together to collaborate. I never, after having done this successfully, want to see anyone underestimate the ability of these companies to sort of take off their company badges and put their engineers in a room together and have them successfully willing to collaborate. You now have a case study that this works, so you don't have to guess anymore. We also don't have to wait for big activity events to do this, right? This is something that, I'll tell you, Rockwell is looking at how to build this infrastructure to do this just generically for vulnerabilities that we think could raise a higher risk if someone was to exploit them, right? So this is something that we are building infrastructure internally to say, how do we normalize this? How do we make this the new norm? How do I make sure that for vulnerabilities that I'm a little bit more concerned about, that I can call up all these folks and say, hey, I'm a little worried about this one. If someone got a hold of this, it could be an issue. And so, if we're looking to disclose this in August, can we all get on the phone in June, July, write some detection rules for this, push them, just make sure that everyone's covered, right? This has gone from being a year ago, right? This has gone from, we don't even know if this is freaking possible. We don't know if these people are actually able to work this way, to, hey, how do we build this infrastructure so that we can just make this the new normal? And so I really want to encourage everyone, build your A team. Most of them are in this room. They've already done it once. They are happy to replicate it for you. And so we joke around internally that we now have a bat phone, right? That we now have the ability to, if one of these pops up tomorrow, it's still scary. It's way less scary now. It's way less scary knowing that I can call Joe Marshall and Marty and Paul and say, hey, we're all going to get on a call together just like we did last time. And we are going to figure this out collaboratively. And so I would really encourage everyone in this room to leverage your government partners, to leverage your detection partners, and figure out how you're going to do this before it happens. Take it to your leadership. Get a plan in place, work it into your incident command playbooks, because this makes that day way, 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 way easier. And so the way that Rockwell is essentially doing this is we're getting buy-in from leadership. We are pre-building that joint communications infrastructure so that I can basically just flip a switch and turn it on. And we're also building a code of conduct for participants. So things like, hey, anything inside this channel, you can't use at a conference talk without approval, right? If Rockwell's sharing something with you as part of this privileged community of vetted vendors, please don't go run out and submit it to DEF CON without telling me first. If you want to, at least call me. That would be great. And so this is something that I really hope you all are encouraged by, because it was a huge game changer for us. And so I hope Dale doesn't yell at me for this. I begged Dale to make this a panel. It was a little bit of my dream to be flanked by all the folks who helped us with this on stage. And so I just want to take a minute to personally recognize and thank everyone from Tenable and Clarity and Mandiant and Dragos and Talos for enabling us to do this. Also, Clarity was a participant in this as well, just separately because of reasons. CrowdStrike was a partner on this as well. And then they couldn't be here today, but if any of you are customers of mine and you ever get an email from Patrick Feely, and I got their permission to use their names, so no one get scared, please. Patrick Feely, Kyle Neat, or Rick Cherney, they were the absolute unsung heroes of this event. They were the 3 engineers who were my investigation leads. And please know that if you are a customer of ours, you owe them a beer, because the work that they put into this was incredible. At one point, we had discussions about bringing people back from retirement to check 25-year-old code bases, because Patrick raised his hand and said, I'm not sure about that one really, really old thing. We should call this guy. I think he's still a part-time contractor, but he's technically retired, and we did. I would get in the morning after having been up until 11 working on some of this, and they were, I think the last message I would see was from 2 a.m. where they had been up working on code rules. And so if you are a Rockwell customer, please know that those 3 engineers' names, while I may have sort of run air traffic control on this, are the real reason why we were able to push fixes for out-of-support products and get rules in place and do all of this. If any of you were the vendors in those chats, you are now intimately best friends with Kyle, Patrick, and Rick. But they were the true heroes behind the scenes. And so I really want to thank everyone for coming to this today, because it is genuinely the most proud I've ever been of work that I've done. And so hopefully you will take something from this. I hope all the other OEMs find ways to replicate this, because I feel like if we can, it's going to make a huge difference. So thank you all.